Today, I want to talk about our good friends, Krystal and Saagar, who host a show, a very goofy political commentary show on YouTube called Breaking Points. They used to be on a show called Rising, which was on the Hill Network. But lately, Krystal and Saagar, if you look at their channel now, Breaking Points, which has over 600,000 subscribers, lately they've been doing more and more videos about inflation and trying to explain why Americans are experiencing so much inflation. And I actually want to start with a video they put out about 6 months ago on the Hill. Now, I don't know why the date is not on this video, but if you look at the comments, a lot of comments from 6 months ago, so we know this video is at least 6 months old. Pretty sure it was 6 months old, but here's what they had to say. Here's what Saagar had to say 6 months ago. This video, as you can see, titled, Krystal and Saagar, they debunk inflation scaremongering. Let's see what they have to say.
It may not sound fair, but I actually think it is, given that the biggest problems that we have of gas and food in terms of those prices going up, Krystal, it's not because of any sort of demand shock or having anything to do with the money supply.
Not having anything to do with the money supply. This is where you got to ask why they're starting to talk more about, why Krystal and Saagar are starting to put out videos about inflation. And I think a big reason is because now they have some splaining to do. Because these two were pretty big cheerleaders for all of these generous stimulus packages, COVID relief packages, unemployment benefits that have been pushed out the last couple of years. If I'm getting my facts straight, I think that they were actually disappointed that these packages were not generous enough, that the government did not spend more money. And so 6 months ago, when we started to see a little bit of inflation, they said, well, it's not anything to do with the money supply. Because that's one of the criticisms against, I think, a genuine concern with a lot of these generous spending packages is, hey, you know, it might provide some short-term relief, but we might get some bad inflation pretty soon with all of this. And here, 6 months ago, Saagar is saying, well, it's nothing to do with the money supply.
In terms of those prices going up, Krystal, it's not because of any sort of demand shock or having anything to do with the money supply. It's because of supply. Right. It's because our supply chains are all screwed up because of COVID. Shocker.
Now, Saagar is not entirely wrong here. I think a lot of the price increases, the inflation, probably has more to do with supply restrictions. But to act like it has nothing to do, like all of the new money. See, this kind of undermines this whole point together, because if you agree that supply might be an issue with the inflation, then how can you not factor in the fact that the government just created trillions of dollars and sent it out into the economy?
And Russian hackers now, apparently, with Colonial. So this again goes to, we answered a question in our Rising Fuse teasing it about the deficit, and this is exactly what the relative problems are with a lot of deficit hawk mindset, which is that the problems that we have in terms of inflation, rising prices, have everything to do with supply or an asymmetrical demand because the economy is reopening, not because we're living in normal times and prices are happening to skyrocket. So this really is just like a complete and total debunking of
a
lot of people who just want to score political points.
They just want to score political points.
We're having stagflation. Guys, if we were in stagflation, like, things would be a lot worse. Right now, we were discussing, you know what part of the inflation bundle is? Used cars. They're up 10%.
It's just used cars, you guys.
In the last month. Because we live in a crazy economy right now. Everything is reopening. Everything is in flux. Call me in 6 months if the inflation is really there.
Call me in 6 months. Well, now it's 6 months later, and again, they're starting to make some more and more videos. I'm only going to look at two, but they have more than two, where they talk about the real reason why we have inflation. But before we get to these videos, I actually want to go to a video they put out 2 years ago called Saagar and Jetty, U.S. is on the brink of a trade war with China.
Week, what's on your radar, buddy?
Well, what's on the radar is that the United States is currently on the brink of a trade war with China. The president announced a new round of tariffs on China that kicked in on Friday at midnight. After trade negotiations between the two fell apart, he actually addressed it while he was speaking to the nation on Friday.
What I'm doing now with China should have happened many years ago, not just Obama, long before Obama.
Now, Wall Street is suffering right now. They have long benefited from the fact that the United States and China have some of the two most integrated economies in the world. We have a supply chain from China, which feeds cheap U.S. goods.
feeds cheap U.S. goods.
And we're supposed to believe, from many of our friends, that because the Wall Street is suffering, that the U.S. market as a whole is. But are you really better off because the plastic cup that you drink your coffee in is 0.0005 cents cheaper? And what's that leading
Are you really better off?
to is a new nationalism. It's a new sense within the United States that because we have to pay 5 to 10% or 5 to 10 cent more for a particular product, or maybe $100 more for an iPhone that's
Yeah, guys, it would just be $100 more for an iPhone
domestically produced, that a critical supply
if it were domestically produced.
chain is not controlled by a basically self-declared adversary, if not enemy, of the United States.
Now, here's the thing, and the point of this segment today is not to talk about international trade. But you're going to see this comes up again, the whole point of international trade. But it is worth reminding that I think when it comes to international trade, the obsession over China is often a red herring. It's often used to set up a Mott and Bailey tactic. Because they talk about China, he just mentions how China, they're adversarial, if not an enemy of the United States. But you have to remember that, first off, we get less than 20% of our imports from China. Not to mention, if you really wanted to, if China's the real issue, why don't we do things like, I don't know, why don't we join the Trans-Pacific Partnership, where we would have better trade relations with countries like Australia, Japan, Mexico, where America's influence would be strengthened in that region. Well, people like Krystal and Saagar have already said earlier this year, they're worried that Biden might get us back into the TPP. And why is that?
Not like TPP. This was essentially, to bottom line, I mean, it was written by corporate interests for corporate interests.
Oh, no. Corporations might benefit you guys.
That's what it is. It's standard issue, like
Under the
NAFTA
guise of
type.
confronting China.
Under the guise of confronting China. Look how dismissive he is of this saga. So it's not about standing up to China. Most people who are focused on restricting international trade, it's mostly due to protectionism. Because if China is really this big, awful country, and they are, I'm not trying to downplay how horrible China is. But if you really want to stick it to China, I would offer this. Okay, let's shut down trade with China completely. Let's not do these pussyfoot tactics where, we're just going to slap a little bit of tariffs here and there on China. And then open up trade, reduce tariffs to zero with every other country. Most trade isolationists would also reject that. Because it's not really about China.
It's leading.
As we saw with the Trump administration, they put tariffs on EU products. They put tariffs on lumber and steel that came from places like Canada and Brazil.
To a new politics and a new idea that, yes, that you can impose tariffs, that free trade is not always good.
You can impose tariffs, and free trade is not always good.
And that just because GDP growth is at 3.2 or 3.3%, that we're all supposedly better off. And I think, Krystal, what it points to is a new awakening. You have Democratic candidates who will not denounce the president's policies on China.
Yeah.
They will not denounce the president's policies on the U.S.-Mexico trade agreement. What they will say is on the policymaking process. And sure, is policymaking by tweet, which the president tweeted this morning in reaction to his own National Economic Council directors, necessarily the best thing? With the president, he's saying there that there's no reason for the U.S. consumer to pay the tariffs which take effect on China today. That's not necessarily correct.
It's not accurate.
Is the United States consumer going to have a slight increase in price?
Are they going to have a slight increase in price?
Possibly.
Probably.
Is that a bad thing, though?
Is that a bad thing?
For the downstream effect is all the economists can talk about is the 5% increase at the grocery store, and they act as
Guys, well, it'll just be like a 5% increase at the grocery store. What's the big fucking deal here? Let's get these tariffs. Come on.
if that alone is what drives people.
Well, and you had Larry Kudlow sort of acknowledging the reality that a tariff is basically a tax on consumers. Let's take a listen to what Mr. Kudlow had to say.
Fair enough. In fact, both sides will pay. Both sides will pay in these things.
Yeah, and that's reality. But I mean, I can't disagree with you. Look, we are a nation of addicts in many ways, and one of the things that we're addicted to is cheap Chinese crap.
All we get from China is cheap Chinese crap.
Right. Has it made our country better? No. And there was
Has it made our country better? No, according to Krystal. Okay, got that out of the way. Keep all of that in mind. Let's take a look at this video they put out on November 11th. Meat, gas, rent inflation spikes as Biden absent. What are these two saying about inflation now?
with regards to inflation.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. We got the inflation numbers out as the highest number since the 1990s, but it's important to see where Americans are
Highest number since the 1990s.
seeing the most inflation, so please keep this up there for a little bit. Number one is fuel oil at 60% year-over-year increase. Gas predominantly there, 50%. Utilities at 28%. Used cars still coming in at 26%.
Yeah, so fuel gas, utilities.
Hotels, steaks, bacon, and pork chops is the same thing. We're seeing a large increase in the protein supply chain, and we're going to continue to track that. Washing machines at 15%, furniture 12%, eggs, fish,
Washing machines at 15%.
TVs, new cars, chicken, milk, coffee, flour, rent. So basically, gas, food, the stuff they use to heat your car, all of the things that people generally need. And this is really, I mean, terrible.
Pocketbook hard.
It's very, very, very bad. And because what it is that it hits working class Americans the hardest. And really what, breaks and should break everybody's heart is that even though we have seen some hourly increase in wages, and, we're talking about the Great Resignation and all of that, if we include inflation in that, let's put this up there on the screen, after adjusting for today's numbers, average hourly wages actually fell 1.2% from October of 2020 to October 2021. The change in the real average hourly earnings combined with a decrease
Also, I don't know if you guys caught it, but that list, rent was at the bottom at 3%.
in the average work week resulted in a 1.6% decline in real average weekly earnings. And so, of course, that means that people are actually making on an adjusted basis less money and they're paying more for goods. So that's a tragedy, Krystal. And look, I mean, there's a lot to be said about why exactly all of this is happening.
Why is all this happening?
But it is not just the United States, it's Europe, it's China. They're rolling blackouts all across China. The entire
And it can't possibly be due to the increase in money supply.
world is just suffering from a massive supply crunch and with just wonky changes in demand. Essentially what happened is everyone was shut down for 18 months and then people saved a lot of money. Household savings is an all-time high. Now we have the Christmas
Household savings is at an all-time high. Again, probably nothing to do with the fact that we just sent thousands of dollars to every American.
season upon us. Boom. 40% of retail sales actually happen in these 2 months.
Yeah.
You combine that with a
Or most Americans, I should say.
supply chain that's backed up all the way and all of these crazy shortages that we're seeing in the inputs for food, inputs for the supply chain, inputs for, for the containers, and you have a horrific disaster like this. And once again, Joe Biden, nowhere to be seen. Yesterday, the only thing that I heard him notably say was, did you ever think you'd pay this much for gas? And I was like, yeah, no, actually. Maybe
Yeah, where are you, Joe Biden? Come save us.
we should do something about it. So
Helpful. Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is if you go down that
I'm interested in what they think Joe Biden should do.
list, you can tell a sort of unique story about each
Every
one
day.
of these
Yep.
items.
Yeah, we've done that
And
here.
you've done a really good job digging into some of those things. I mean, part of why a lot of protein, and we can put Heather Long's tweet up on the screen here, that indicates in particular why Americans are paying higher grocery
I mean, look at the bottom. Food at home, 5.4%, milk, 6%, flour, 5%. It's just 5%. I thought this was like insignificant. Where 2 years ago, oh yeah, we can totally mess up our trade relations with other countries and start trade wars because it's just an extra 5%. What's the big deal?
bills. A lot of it has to do with protein, steaks,
Steak,
bacon, pork chops,
right.
eggs, fish, chicken. So a lot of those things can be traced back in part to the fact that you had drought caused by climate change that created stress in the corn market.
So now it's climate change's fault. This goes back to what I was saying earlier about Elizabeth Warren's tweet. Earlier today, Elizabeth Warren tweeted, prices at the pump have gone up. Why? Because giant oil companies like Chevron and ExxonMobil enjoy doubling their profits. This is not about inflation. This is about price gouging for these guys, and we need to call them out.
Blow it out your ass.
And I've been saying this was going to happen. That people like Elizabeth Warren, people like Joe Biden, they're not going to take responsibility. They're not going to say, maybe we spent a little too much money. Maybe we're imposing too many taxes. Maybe we're restricting too many fossil fuels. Because, again, the Democrats have pursued an anti-fossil fuel agenda in the name of what? Reducing carbon emissions, an effort to fight climate change, which they're now blaming inflation on, partially on. I mean, but could this have anything to do with their anti-fossil fuel agenda? Like the Biden administration has suspended new oil, gas, and drilling permits at times throughout his presidency so far. And according to the Congressional Budget Office, this new bill that's going through is going to add $8 billion in home heating taxes. So when we read stories in a few months, maybe a year, about how heating bills and utility bills, they're namely taxes on natural gas. When we start reading stories about how utility bills, heating bills, and gas bills are up, do you think people like Elizabeth Warren, Joe Biden, Krystal and Saagar, are they going to think, well, you know what the real culprit is? Oh, it was those spending packages that snuck in all of these taxes on utilities. Fuck it, just blame climate change.
All of these animals, for better or worse, are fed with corn. So you can sort of tell a unique story with each one of these things. Of course, the used cars. We've been tracking
That's a
that for a
classic
long
story.
time. We've talked about housing. Now, rent prices are really starting to go
Housing and rent prices are starting to go up.
up. There are unique reasons for that as well.
Unique reasons. But what's a reason?
But a lot of these things can be traced back to a few factors. Number one, that we need China so much, that we've outsourced so much to China. We're so
31%
dependent on them.
increase in imports
Oh, you guys notice what they're doing now.
over the last year.
So the minute
So now outsourcing is the reason why we have inflation, the reason why prices are higher.
there's an issue getting things out of China and there aren't enough shipping containers, and that was part of the stories. The shipping containers at the beginning of the pandemic went out from China with the PPE all over the world. They got stuck in ports around the world. That created, and then when they got sent back, that created a backlog on the other end. So part of it is that we've outsourced so much to China, critical goods that people need, that families depend on, all of those things.
Critical, did she just say critical needs that people depend on?
So part of it is that we've outsourced so much to China, critical goods that people need, that families depend on, all of those.
Oh, because I thought 2 years ago, she said it was just a bunch of crap that we don't really need.
Fair enough. In fact, both sides will pay. Both sides will pay in these things.
Yeah, and that's reality. But I mean, I can't disagree with you. Look, we are a nation of addicts in many ways, and one of the things that we're addicted to is cheap Chinese crap.
Right.
Has it made our country better? No. And there was
Hasn't made our country better, just a bunch of cheap crap. But now that the trade war, the lockdowns, and probably other factors, government intervention in the economy, because she also mentioned rents and housing. Can we blame that on Chinese outsourcing? Did Americans suddenly outsource their apartment complexes and condominium buildings and rental houses? Did we just send all of that shit to Shanghai? Of course, she's not going to go into all of the government intervention, one of which was the trade wars, all of these tariffs, which made constructing new housing more expensive with tariffs on resources like steel and lumber. Also, government intervention in the form of artificially lowering interest rates, which has spiked demand in housing. And when it comes to rent, there's been a lot of speculation that rent has gone up, partly due to these attempts to control rent and all these eviction moratoriums, which have scared landlords into demanding more money up front for security reasons. Didn't want to go in too much into detail on that. I guess we can just blame outsourcing, though. Which, again, 2 years ago, they were saying, oh, well, it might result in lower prices, but it's something that Americans should be expected to pay. And after the trade wars, after new tariffs, on top of that, lockdowns, more money just spent into the economy, printing the economy. Now they're going to blame outsourcing for higher prices. These two are a total clown show, folks.
Those things. Part of it is that we have these gigantic monopolies in
Oh, it's also monopolies.
charge of almost every economic sphere has massive consolidation at this
Market consolidation.
point. To make that point, just to zero in on one particular issue where monopolies are causing a lot of the price increases here, when you talk about steak, when you talk about beef, there's
See, when we're talking about steak and beef, she just blamed climate change, but now I guess we get to blame market consolidation. Let's see where she goes with this.
been massive consolidation in the meat processing industry, and that has created issues and increased prices. Our friends over at More Perfect Union did a great job breaking that down. Let's take a look at that.
Have you been to your local
So now they're going to share this video. Cattle ranchers are struggling to turn a profit, and they're blaming this on, these big, scary monopolies in meat. They're squeezing all of the cattle ranchers and meat farmers. You know what else really hurts cattle ranchers and farmers in general? You know what else really hurt these farmers? It was the trade war, which I talked about a lot in my video, Charlie Kirk Doesn't Understand Economics, but you guys really don't have to take my word for it. You can also take Crystal Ball's word for it, folks.
resolved anytime soon. But there's all this alarmism from the sort of previous consensus,
Right.
business-friendly consensus that, oh my God, if you do anything different on China trade, it's just going to be an absolute disaster. Clearly that hasn't borne out. Now, are there people that are hurting already from this? Yes, primarily farmers, primarily in Trump.
So farmers have been hurt by the trade war. And she's right.
parts of the country.
So much so that we've had to spend billions of dollars to bail them out.
Right? They are truly being hurt and hit already.
But if you talk to them, they'll say, but the president is making moves on China.
Yeah.
And it's God forbid that JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs and all these big corporations cannot buy back 2% more.
And listen to Saagar over here, like, yeah, you know, they're hurting, but it's worth it because we're hurting Wall Street, you guys. Now, she can't, I imagine she can't mention how this trade war has messed up farmers, because that would kind of undermine her whole point of throwing outsourcing under the bus for inflation. But then you take it a step further. You jump to 735. And it says right here, according to this video that they're using to make this point about how monopolization is responsible for the inflation and it's really happening in the meat industry. When right here we can see the big four meat packers control more than 80% of the beef industry. Which is odd because I've always thought that monopoly meant one company controls an entire business or an entire industry. So on paper, this is not even a monopoly. But on top of that, this is not a new phenomenon. The fact that 4 meat packers control 80% of the beef industry, it's not like this suddenly happened within the last 1 to 2 years and now they're starting to squeeze all these poor cattle ranchers and they're jacking up prices. And I know this is not a new phenomenon because this is a talking point that our good friend Robespierre Reich brought up back in 2018, as you can see.
But let's take a closer look.
Monopolies everywhere.
The 4 largest food companies control 82% of beef packing.
So, if we're able to conclude that these sudden spikes in prices, what was it, 25% on steak, others are way more than 10%? If we're to blame this on market consolidation, as Krystal Ball is trying to do, how come we didn't see these similar spikes in, say, 2018 or 2019?
Really makes you think.
So that's Krystal and Saagar. This is what they're blaming inflation on. Not increase in money supply, not government intervention in the economy that is restricting supply, but...
But again, when you dig into each one of these specific goods that you've seen so much of a price increase in, you can track back all of these different unique supply chain issues. But a lot of times it comes back to outsourcing to China.
Outsourcing to China, which 2 years ago they said, oh, it might reduce prices, but we can all afford an extra 5% at the grocery store.
And monopolization.
It's monopolization.
Monopolization and outsourcing to China. And the one example they use is not a new phenomenon that you can really attribute to the price increases.
It's also, the climate is another issue.
And it's climate change. So they put out another video on this, on inflation. This came out a week later. Now they're taking the Elizabeth Warren route and they're blaming big business for the audacity of raising prices.
Has been discussing is the individual actors who are the corporations themselves. So let's put this up there on the screen from the Wall Street Journal, who actually did a great investigation. What does inflation mean for American businesses? For some, bigger profits. So get this, nearly 2 out of 3 of the biggest U.S. publicly traded companies reported fatter profit margins than they did before the pandemic in a very unprecedented environment. Now, that doesn't make a lot of sense because what you hear from the corporations whenever they raise prices is this. Hey, our supply went up, so we have to charge you more. Basic supply and demand, we're not making any more money. Right. We're just passing on the cost to the consumer. Well, what we're seeing here is that when the 2/3 of the companies are raising the prices, sometimes they say, well, everybody's used to raising higher prices right now. This is the best excuse that we've ever had. And so maybe they just jack it up a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more.
Now, this is all conjecture on Saagar's part, because as you'll see, they're about to reference this Wall Street Journal article and a Business Insider article. And they say nothing. They have no evidence. And if there is evidence, they don't bring it up. But they show nothing to support what they're saying here.
And then next thing you know, you got 2/3 of the entire Fortune 500 with higher profit margins than ever before. Now, it is true that profit margins sometimes rise with inflation.
And by the way, this cannot be explained in other areas of the economy, like, again, used cars and housing, which are not controlled by big, scary monopolies and Fortune 500 companies. You know, you think anyone who's putting their house on the market now and they're getting 5 offers above asking price, you think they're just sitting back and thinking, yeah, you know what? I'm getting all these offers well above market price, but I should really sell to someone at what I think is a fair price. No, they're going to try to get the best dollar, the most money they can get from anyone who's willing to take the house off their hands.
But what they are seeing is that the companies are skewing much more to the side of as high a price as they can possibly justify, because they know that the consumer, paradoxically, is now used to it. They will not.
See, what he's saying is that, the companies, they know the consumers, they're already conditioned for inflation, so they're just jacking up prices more and more.
Consumers will usually are pretty price conscious. They'll go see their grocery stores. Maybe they'll compare across the board. But in this type of a crazy environment, they go, man, it's just, inflation, right? I used to pay this. Now I pay this. And you're not asking as many questions about the proportion in that rise of increase. And there's no other word for this. They're bilking us. Like that.
They're bilking us.
That's what this is. Using it as an excuse in order to charge you and us more money. That's the bottom line.
And how do we know? Because their CEOs are bragging about it.
They're bragging about it.
On investor calls. That's how we know.
On investor calls.
Okay. They go through in the Wall Street Journal, numerous CEOs who are telling their investors.
Now, she just mentioned Wall Street Journal. You're going to see they cite nothing from that article. All they did was read the headline. They cited no evidence whatsoever from that Wall Street Journal article that they're referencing.
We've been able to price up. So
no quotes. Nothing.
So that's why we're getting these fat profit margins. We can throw the Business Insider tear sheet up on the screen as
well.
Now
they're pivoting to Business Insider after quoting nothing from the Wall Street Journal article.
Which talks about Walmart, which announced third quarter financial results this morning.
Walmart.
Able to post better than expected earnings, in part by offering fewer discounts to shoppers, but a lot.
See, now she's mentioning Walmart to make you think that they're one of these companies that's jacking up prices like Saagar did. Yeah, they're just jacking them up and up. And they're bragging to investors. They're saying, these dumb customers, these Americans, they're already conditioned for inflation, so we're just gonna keep jacking up those prices. That's apparently what Walmart's doing.
A lot of large firms have spent their recent quarterly calls.
Now I'm gonna slow it down because she's about to give a few quotes that I guess prove her point.
Bragging to investors about their ability to hike prices with relative impunity. Here's the CEO of Colgate-Palmolive saying, "What we are very good at is pricing. Whether it's foreign exchange inflation or raw and packing material inflation, we have found ways over time to recover that in our margin line."
Oh, no, you guys, they found ways to recover their margin line.
Have the Kroger CFO saying, "We've been very comfortable with our ability to pass on the increases that we've seen at this point, and we would expect that to continue to be the case." So,
oh no, the Kroger CEO admitted that they were comfortable with raising prices in an inflationary environment. Now, when I put this on YouTube, I will link to the transcripts of these investor calls. Because, yeah, they're not really bragging. When I read into these, I didn't read them entirely. But when I read the parts about inflation and pricing, the sense I got was that these corporate executives, these CEOs, they're mostly proud of the fact that they're able to maintain profits and revenues despite all of the complications with supply chains and inflation. What I did not see, and, if you guys read it, and if you guys can find it, please tell me in the comments below. But what I did not see were these executives saying like, "Oh my God, look at these dumb customers. They're already expecting inflation. Let's just jack up these prices even higher."
These companies are literally bragging about the fact that they're able to use inflation.
They're literally bragging.
As a way to start either giving fewer discounts or...
Not to mention, so she brought up Walmart, which is funny because there's actually another article from Business Insider that was put up on November 17th that talks about how Walmart, according to this article, on Walmart's earning call, CEO Doug McMillon said that, quote, "With inflationary environment, there are things that come along with that, and the company's cost inflation is higher than its retail inflation, meaning that it is swallowing certain costs so customers don't have to pay quite as much." the company's consolidated gross profit rate, that is, its margin, was down slightly by 42 basis points.
I've got balls of steel.
I played the wrong drop. Same with Target. Later on during the week, Target also reported higher profits than expected, but also reported absorbing higher costs to keep prices down for consumers. Its stock took a hit, with its shares falling as much as 5% because it bucked the higher profit margin trend.
Or upping their price overall to not just overcome that inflation, but post the largest earnings and the fattest profits that they have ever had in many cases. And the other piece of the story is monopolies.
Yes.
Because if you...
Now she's going to get into monopolies. Now, oddly enough, missing from all of this monopoly talk about how big, scary monopolies, they're the ones really responsible for all this inflation. They don't really seem to bring up the biggest, baddest monopoly of them all at the moment, which is Amazon. I gotta wonder, did Walmart suddenly take Amazon over as the biggest, scariest monopoly? Although, as I just said, Walmart's example doesn't really apply. You can't really use it for their dumb analysis.
you had actual competitive markets, then what would happen? You might try to hike your prices super high. Your competitor would say, you know what? I can undercut them and still make a profit margin. So I'm going to do that and win consumers over that way. But when you have a monopoly, well, that function doesn't happen.
Correct.
So these companies just get to continue to increase prices, knowing you have few other options and knowing that there are very few, other competitors out there.
You guys get all that? Her analysis on why monopolies are bad? Now, Saagar is going to go on to say this is why we need government regulation. These monopolies need to be broken up. Or we just need pressure from the government on these monopolies so to keep prices low. So let's take this at face value that competition is good, that monopolies are bad because without competition, monopolies can just jack up prices more and more, and there's no one to compete with them. That's why we need government intervention whenever there's a big, bad, scary monopoly, so that we can maintain and foster competition to give consumers more options, more alternatives, and lower prices. Let's take that at face value. Why don't they also use, let's go back to the beginning, when I brought up their thing on the trade war. Notice they don't have this same policy. They don't apply the same standard when it comes to international trade. Because when it comes to international trade and overseas trade, then they're suddenly like, whoa, 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 whoa. We can't allow all this competition into America to compete with American businesses and American workers. No, 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 no. What we really got to do is we got to save American consumers with government intervention by stopping competition. We got to save American consumers from more options, more alternatives, and lower prices.
That's just not smart.
You know, they call their show Breaking Points, which I think is fitting because as we can see with populism tends to break a lot of things. Two of those things happen to be your spending power and your brain.